Hello, good morning, everybody. My name is Eric Clay. I am with Flare, and today we have a really exciting webinar called The State of the Dark Web. Interestingly, this webinar has been kind of a hit. We started it back in 2022, and it is the easiest webinar in the world to get signups for. We don't even really have to try. People are just very excited to hear about what's going on in the cybercrime ecosystem in any given year, and typically the ecosystem doesn't disappoint. With me today, we have three guests, all from Flare. Nick, do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Ascoli. I'm the senior product strategist here and an active contributor to our research org. So I'm excited to be here, excited to catch you guys up on what's going on.
Matthew, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Eric. So hi, I'm Mathieu. I'm a CTO and co-founder of Flare, also part of the research team as I involve in the engineering and research, and happy to be here with the rest of my colleagues.
And finally, Tammy.
Hello, I'm the senior threat intelligence researcher here at Flare. My main focus is the research team and collaborating on research projects.
Awesome. Today, we're going to have a really detailed presentation, but we're really going to try to focus on discussion as well, with the slides as kind of a backdrop to help kind of pivot across different topics, from ransomware to fraud to dark web forums to dark web markets, and then kind of tie these all together and put the current events that you probably see in the news, from Black Hat being taken down to Lockbit being taken down to even Lockbit's website going offline this morning, in context given the kind of broader state of the ecosystem. So we're going to start with the topic that everybody hears about in the news 24/7, ransomware. So there's been a lot of ransomware activity in the past 6 months, both in terms of ransomware groups attacking companies and also ransomware groups being taken down, and kind of like this internecine warfare between ransomware groups. Tammy, I'm going to start by asking you, can you provide just kind of a high-level overview of some of the recent ransomware events we've seen and kind of help put them in context up until this morning, where we saw Lockbit's website go offline?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the past 6 months, law enforcement has been very, very active in terms of targeting high-profile ransomware groups. So in December of 2023, we saw law enforcement first target Alpha, also known as Black Hat. They were pretty much the number 2 in the ransomware game up until that point. And then in February, we saw law enforcement and the NCA and the FBI, Department of Justice, turn their sights on to Lockbit. They took a very psychological warfare type of approach to this. We saw them basically exploit a PHP vulnerability in Lockbit's infrastructure, and were able to take over the main blog. And from there, it was all psychological, trying to intimidate and about exploiting the identity of Lockbit Sup. Because as of now, up until that point, Lockbit Sup was even putting bounties on his head, saying, like, if anybody can give me my name, I will pay X amount. I think it went up to like 1 million, then 10 million up until that point. So we saw this with Operation Chronos. So this whole operation was Operation Chronos, and it was a multi-staged event. We saw them basically, law enforcement, seize the website, then dump a whole bunch of encryption keys to victims and decryption keys to victims. And they came back about a month later to say, okay, now we have the identity of Lockbit Sup, and they released the identity. And they were able to do this by tracing back some crypto wallets. What's really fascinating as well is that in terms of major events, we're seeing healthcare becoming more and more targeted. And this is in part because there was a very high profile, it was in the news, Change Healthcare. So what happened with that one is that there was allegedly a very large ransom payment that was made, and this caught the eyes, 22 million. This caught the eyes of a lot of affiliates and a lot of groups saying, hey, we want part of that. And now we're seeing the healthcare industry really getting targeted and hit hard.
Yeah, no, I think that was a fantastic recap, Tammy. And just for those who may not be aware, may not be super familiar with the ransomware ecosystem, you tend to have these ransomware as a service groups like Lockbit or Alfie, Black Cat, where they're really providing the ransomware code, and then they're kind of farming out the work of infections to these affiliates who then carry out the attacks and they split the profits. And so I think, and I would really be curious for kind of some your take on this, Tammy. I think one of the key parts of this is there's a competition between these groups themselves, right? There's a competition between Clop and Lockbit and and previously Black Cat, where they're kind of fighting not over getting ransomware victims, but actually getting the affiliates who actually carry out the attacks, because those are where the money is. Do you want to expand on that a little bit? You're on mute, Tammy.
Sorry, poaching into affiliates and loyalty among affiliates is a very big thing. So the best affiliates are the ones that bring in the most money, because usually ransomware as a service is organized and as a split profit type of deal. So the ransomware as a service will receive a smaller portion than the actual affiliate. So the affiliate, usually it's between we've seen 70% go to the ransom go to the affiliates, and then 30% go to the ransomware group, the operators. And then this split goes from 80-20, 90-10, depending on the group. And then we've seen other variations and other agreements as well in terms of like profit sharing. So the more you can generate in terms of revenue, in terms of ransom payments, for them, this is considered like a revenue. It's a business. You have favorable outcomes. So this is a way to incentivize affiliates to join their groups. And how do you retain those groups? A lot of ransomware services start to provide like perks. So for example, they'll say like, we can provide you with initial access. We can provide you with tools. We can provide you with stealers. We can provide you with credentials and exfiltration platforms. So they basically start to, the better you are as an affiliate, the more you have as perks, and the more they try to gain your loyalty towards that brand. And it doesn't mean that they're poaching back and forth, especially when a group goes down and ceases operation, then affiliates can move to other groups. This doesn't mean that affiliates are exclusive to single groups. We've seen affiliates work in tandem with a lot of groups at the same time as well.
No, that's a fantastic explanation. I appreciate it. Matthew, I'm going to have you talk for just a minute about some of the key trends in ransomware we've seen recently. With full knowledge, you probably haven't had time to look at the slide deck before, so you get to talk to a slide you haven't seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think what is in the slide and what you're kind of the key ransomware trends here is like we still see the concept as ransomware as a service being a key part of the ecosystem. We have all kind of like there's kind of a like scattered ecosystem at the moment where like the big players being there, and we see a lot of like those smaller ransomware group trying to make their way in, leveraging all kind of new technology. I think like you have like the concept of training, you have like different builders being made, cryptors. So each different small group try to differentiate themselves as the different technology and the tech stack they're providing to the affiliate. I think as Tammy mentioned, and that was the trend that is somewhat to some extent a little bit scary, as we see more and more the healthcare being targeted. There was kind of this golden rule before between ransomware group where they didn't target healthcare or try to like anything that could lead to a direct impact on a human life, where we see that being more openly debated, while the to like using a little bit of demagogy, saying like, oh, it's because of the hospital, it's not secure. The fault is on the hospital, not the ransomware group, and that is a little bit disturbing in terms of rationale from the different group, but that's something that we see at the moment. We see as well, like, I mean, same thing, like the CIS country are usually not being targeted by ransomware. We still see like the United States, Great Britain, Canada, and other European country forming that. I think one thing that we see is one one also trend that is not in the slide is we see as well one group that threatened to fill up SEC filing when they make it a target, which is also kind of a new triple extortion technique that we see more and more. We still see some player kind of stepping out. I think like in 2024, I think there's still some new, but like also existing. So we think about Quillen, we think about Play. They've been there for a while. Ransom Hub as well. Hunter International also is part of the group. Black Suit is quite of new, but we see like those smaller group kind of taking a little bit over. But at this stage, I think it's really too soon to tell like what will be the landscape in 1 or 2 months. There's still a lot of a consolidation and movement in that space at the moment.
So I think this slide really opens up like a great potential for discussion, which is something I very much want to have today. And so I have kind of this key question. There's even debate internally on our research team about this, right? Is there's this whole debate over, do threat actors target industries? Like, it being in threat intelligence, one of the requests you get like very often is like, tell us about threats to financial services or tell us about threats to healthcare. And I think one of the really interesting questions that has opened up recently is, are ransomware groups specifically targeting healthcare, right? So back a few months ago, you had this Black Cat attack on Change Healthcare. It led to a record ransomware payout of, I think, 22 million. I mean, it was an absolutely huge sum of money, even compared to the averages in ransomware. And I think in the past, you've seen this kind of catch on, right? Like in 2019, you had Maze, which was the kind of first ransomware group that pioneered like double and triple extortion techniques, where they started releasing data on top of encrypting it. And then suddenly a lot of other ransomware groups piled in. And I wonder if you're not seeing the same thing in healthcare, where you had the Change Healthcare attack, and then other ransomware groups were like, wow, they got a lot of money, because as it turns out, people really care about not having healthcare records publicly disclosed. And then you see this kind of pile on. And so I'm going to kind of ask each of you individually, starting with Nick, do you think that ransomware groups, and I recognize this is very speculative, are targeting healthcare specifically because they think it leads to higher payouts, because it's kind of more critical than, say, like an accounting firm? Not to diminish the work of any accountants on the call.
I think as a trend, ransomware groups have targeted industries, and ransomware groups might follow trends of targeting an industry that's particularly successful at the moment. Broadly speaking, I think it's still well observed that they cast a very wide net. Up to the largest groups are still, wouldn't necessarily affiliate themselves with a specific industry that's in their target. In fact, usually if there's a mention of industry, it's that we exclude this industry, which is some groups exclude healthcare specifically, or decrypt hospitals when they've accidentally infected one, because again, they cast a wide net and aren't always intentionally infecting their targets. The target just happened to be on the email list that they bought, or the stealer that they bought, and then the automated deployment pipeline of their campaign led to them infecting someone they did or did not intend to infect, or someone they are or are not interested in actually extorting. So kind of a long answer there, but the answer is kind of maybe at times. Let's see what the others have to say.
It's hard to spark a great debate between people if you give the maybe at times answer.
Let's hear
what Tammy has to say. Tammy, do you think ransomware groups are deliberately targeting healthcare?
More and more and more, I believe so. It's even on cybercrime forums. There's this debate going on between threat actors. You see there is a disdain for groups that do openly target healthcare, but then the definition is, what is a healthcare industry? So we see like groups like a new group that appeared in 2024 called Qlong. Qlong is a group that has predominantly targeted Brazilian plastic surgery victims. Is that healthcare? Then we have the idea of what is a private and public clinic. Is that healthcare? And then we see basically pharmacies as well. Is that healthcare? This is really interesting to see as this develops. We see more and more and more overall healthcare being targeted, yes.
And Matthew, last but not least.
Yeah, I'm gonna go on the other direction. Like, I still think that people, like the ransomware group, are being opportunistic, and I think the trend is a side effect of it. while like this is actually like they did something that worked, that given a good payout. So like, why not try to repeat that? And like same tool set, like the different industry by definition share some kind of a standard tooling or kind of a standard similarities in the infrastructure. So yeah, I mean, it ends up, I think it's more like a side effect of like they've been successful with one and say, well, I'll try another one. And that being said, like it's tough to say that it's trend because by definition, since you have affiliates, also all affiliates will have a different strategy that will be comfortable and develop their kind of expertise. So I think it's kind of the effect of being opportunistic and like doing something like repetitive work of like redoing the same thing over and over. You get more efficient. So I think in that mindset, you may see some teams over that, but I think it's just like different bubbles that get like targeted one after the other. It's like they target one victim and say, hey, is there like other adjacent space that I can, or adjacent company or organization that I can target the same way? And just kind of I don't think it's well taught. It's just a concept of like trying different things and see what works, and while it's worth trying to repeat it to get more of it as much as possible.
I think these are all excellent perspectives. Let's see. Let's go ahead and move on to I believe, our last slide in ransomware, which is kind of a continuation of some of the key trends. So I think that there's a really interesting ransomware group that everybody's at least probably heard of on this call, Clop, that has a very different methodology than a lot of kind of the other ransomware groups we see, like Lockbit or Black Cat or some of the other kind of very significant ones, Play, which is instead, most of these ransomware groups, they have ransomware code, they infect victims, or they have affiliates kind of infect victims, and they carry out these attacks. And it's really whatever method is easiest. It might be credentials, it might be serial logs, it might be like known exploited vulnerabilities. Clop has a very different methodology, and I'm going to ask Matthew to explain kind of what makes Clop a little bit different and unique.
Yeah, I mean, for historical reason, yeah, for Clops, that is what we've seen as this group was doing is they were developing 0 days exploit in order to target like large companies. So they were trying to find 0 days in software that was widely used by organization, and they were trying to like stay under the radar because they were the only one to have, by definition, 0 day. So kind of trying to access most of those organizations, staying under the radar, establishing their presence in those organizations, and almost at the same time disclosing, like exfiltrating the information, because as soon as you start exfiltrating the information, well, you kind of unveil the 0 days. So, or the more information, the more company you have access to, the more chance you got to be detected by behavior system or the type of system in place, or detection system that can trigger the chain. So it's kind of a interesting approach where it goes by wave. So you find a 0 day, you infiltrate as much as company as possible. As soon as you see like you're about to be unveiled, then you exfiltrate the data. And then you have like, this is the reason why we saw like at some point up to like 200 victims at the same time on Clop's ransomware blog. So that's kind of quite unique. We still see some like corporate system being targeted, like EXXC was targeted recently. So there's still some kind of a trend of like targeting software being used by companies, but really like the 0 day approach instead of like the 1 day approach that other groups are using was quite unique.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. And Tammy, I think this is a really interesting one. So I think we've discussed at length in other webinars and events that Telegram is kind of a huge hub for cybercrime. It's more of a corollary to the dark web than a replacement for the dark web, where you see cyber criminals often operate on Tor sites, but then they switch over to instant messaging on Telegram, which is at least allegedly peer-to-peer encrypted. Can you talk a little bit about this? This is really interesting. That Telegram being used to distribute victim data. Can you talk a little bit about what we're seeing there? Because I do think this is a really interesting trend that's also very significant.
Yeah, so Telegram makes it very easy to share large files. 2 gigabytes, up to 2 gigabytes if you have a free account, and up to 4 gigabytes if you have a paid account, a premium account. And it just makes it really, really easy for threat actors to use that as a private cloud. So for example, I'll take one group, for example, Quillen. So Quillen, interestingly, made a public claim to Synovis, which is a company that works, a healthcare provider for NHS London. They help with like blood work and stuff like that. And on the Tor blog, Quillen made that claim saying that we have the data and we're going to leak it. And it was supposed to be leaked on the Tor blog. And they had made a claim of June 24th. But a few days before that claim of June 24th of leaking the data on their Tor site, they had leaked nearly 400 gigabytes in compressed data on Telegram, on their private Telegram channel. So it makes it really, really easy to distribute the data to a large audience. There's almost 700 subscribers in Quillen's Telegram channel as of today. So that's potentially 700 downloads of 400 gigabytes of data with relative ease.
No, I think that's really interesting that this kind of, and why do you think that they're switching? Why do you think that at least a few ransomware groups have switched from just putting things on a ransom blog on Tor to going to Telegram specifically?
So, and this is one of the points that I really like to think about, because distributing large data sets of victim data is not cheap. You have to pay for hosting, you have to pay for the ability to distribute that, to pay for that bandwidth, pay for the storage. Sometimes these data sets can go into the terabytes and terabytes of size, of storage size. So what's really, really interesting is finding new and innovative ways to distribute this data, but finding it in a way that you can distribute this data that is threatening. Because if you're using a super obscure technology to distribute this data, the availability of that data becomes lower. So there's not as much of a threat of it leaking if only like 20 people can download it. But leaking it on Telegram, where anybody can have an account and anybody can download that data, it definitely increases the threat of leaking that data. So we've seen other threat actors leak data using BitTorrent, which is another very significant way of leaking that data quickly. We've seen other threat actors host it on private VPS and data centers using FTP. We've seen various different ways of hosting data. So even in the last days, the later days of Alpha V, we saw Alpha V leveraging interplanetary file system, IPFS, on CloudFront to distribute their massive data sets. So it's really, really fascinating to see this development.
Awesome. Thank you, Tammy. And I'm going to go to Nick for the last few points here. So I think info stealers was so I'll talk about info stealers, and then Nick, I'm going to bat the last 2 bullet points over to you. So info stealers are a particular passion of mine, which is kind of weird to say, but it's an area I've spent a lot of time like researching, and I've written a few research reports on myself. And we see, I think, about 1 million unique info stealer logs per week right now across like 500 different Telegram channels. It's a really, really huge and poignant issue. And in many cases, these logs contain all of the credentials for single users, including SaaS applications, corporate SaaS applications, single sign-on environments, and then also the session cookies to get access to those. And I suspect we'll talk about this a little bit more later on. Nick, I did want to ask you, so what do you mean by decrease in publicly claimed multi-group victims? And then I'd love to talk for a minute about the Lockbit infrastructure going offline.
Sorry, that point was Tammy.
Oh, Tammy, I'm gonna hit that one back over to you.
Yeah, no worries. So in 2023, we saw a really a very interesting trend happen, which was multiple groups were claiming the same victim. And these victims were either claimed back to back or over a period of about a month or 2 months of time. That is a trend that has not necessarily publicly continued in 2024 as much as it was in 2023. So this really poses a really interesting question about what's happening behind the scenes of where these affiliates and where these ransomware groups are sourcing their access. So potentially these were victims that were targeted because they had the same vulnerability exposed, or they were provided, affiliates were using the same initial access brokers, or they were using similar InfoStealer logs. So this trend of being breached multiple times, we saw companies get breached up to 4 times last week in the span of a year. That trend has decreased publicly, at least, in 2024.
No, that absolutely makes sense. And very quickly, does somebody want to talk? And I'm going to open it up to anybody. Does somebody want to talk about the Lockbit infrastructure going offline? Because I think this is really interesting because Lockbit's been very up and down for the past few months, right? So you would have Lockbit was taken down, and they had a new site, and then that site was taken down. So it's they've really been struggling with consistency lately, which I'm sure is hurting their reputation among affiliates. But does anybody want to talk about the latest instance of them going offline?
I'll let Nick go since he haven't spoken that slide. So Nick, you want to go? I can go as well if you want.
I mean, I think Tammy's the best for ransomware topics in general, but it's uncanny timing with Lockbit claiming or Lockbit going entirely offline after claiming the Federal Reserve of the United States a few days ago, which remains to be, evidence has not yet been produced for the claim, but the only update here is all infrastructure, all mirrors for Lockbit are offline as of this morning. So this is recent news.
All right. And we have ransomware stats 2024 at a glance. I don't know, it's a little smaller on my screen, but I'm not sure how visible it is to other folks. But whoever designed these beautiful charts, do you want to walk us through what they are and what they mean?
I can do that. So basically what we're looking at is the posting spread of ransomware groups. So the large spike that we see, the first bar line on the bar graph is Lockbit. That is skewed. I just want to make that apparent because when Operation Kronos happened and the identity of Lockbit Sup was allegedly revealed, Lockbit went on a tangent. Lockbit pulled a tantrum and started reposting old victims and new victims all in one day. There was over 100 posts in one single day, which skewed the entire metrics and the entire statistics. But the rest is we see a very standard progression of new groups. So like Play and Ransom Hub are big players right now. They come from end of 2023 into 2024. And we also see potential rebrands. So for example, like Knight, aka Cyclops, in 2024, they sold their source code in their RAS program, ransomware as a service program, up to any bidder. And we've seen basically in the month of February, just a few weeks apart, we saw the introduction of Ransom Hub. And other researchers have also speculated that there's a lot of source code and a lot of code matching between the two. And also what's interesting is that because of the Change Healthcare exit scam from Alpha V, one of the affiliates that was responsible for the Change Healthcare moved over to Ransom Hub and also claimed Change Healthcare there. So we see the steady increase this year of groups claiming more and more and more victims. And you can see that also in the scattered graph where you see groups, victims getting posted more and more frequently. There's, I remember last year in November, there was 500 victims in a single month. That was a new record. And now we're beating that consistently almost every month now. It's becoming more and more and more.
Excellent. Thank you, Tammy. Next, we're going to be moving on to dark web forums. And so there's also been a lot of activity with forums. Some of you may have seen that Breach Forums has suffered the same fate as Lockbit in the sense that it is up, down, up, down, up, down over and over again as law enforcement takes it down and then new users bring it back up. So Nick, I'm going to turn this one over to you. Do you want to talk about some of the major forum events we've seen in the past 2 or 3 months?
Yep. So despite the best attempts of law enforcement, Breach Forums is like in a real whack-a-mole situation right now. And to be clear, Breach Forums is currently in a state of up. It is up. It is accessible. All membership from the previous iterations of Breach Forums is restored. So it's not a clean slate necessarily in terms of membership. It's the same cohort from before. And to summarize the latest news in the world of breach forums, which the reason it's so topical is it's the most major forum to come up and down so many times, while several forums, especially in the world of more Russian language forums, have maintained consistent presence, no knocks offline recently, no drama in ownership or changes. But breach forums, as a sort of successor to raid forums, always has itself mixed up in some drama. So most recently, the administrator who followed, the old administrator of breach forums, Omnipotent, was arrested. The successor to them, Pompurin, was arrested. The successor to them, Baphomet, is rumored arrested, but there's no confirmation from law enforcement yet. That rumor is based on this message from the breach forums chat Telegram channel on the right, which is from Shiny Hunters, who would then succeed Baphomet, who says, "We regret to inform you Baphomet has been arrested." This sort of rumors within the community are the only discussions of the arrest. Law enforcement has not confirmed it. There's a lot of theories as to why, but nothing is confirmed yet, and it's not worth speculating until we hear anything. But as a little a nod to the activity when on the seizure image that law enforcement put up, there were bars around Baphomet's profile picture. So they were at least nodding at the fact that there's been an arrest. Outside of drama, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think this is a really interesting and salient point, and I think it's also worth pointing out, like, one of the reasons there's so much discussion over whether these users were arrested, right, is so there was a marketplace, I believe it was back in 2016, called Hansa Market, and basically law enforcement arrested the owners, but then kept it secret for an extended period of time, and then law enforcement was actually running the marketplace and using the data from the marketplace to catch the people using the marketplace. And I think this is like really relevant because I do think it directly plays into like why users care so much as to whether the admins have been arrested. I think there's just a really quick aside because I think it's really funny. So when law enforcement was running this marketplace, like they actually had like law enforcement agents like responding to drug orders, and some of the users were like, "Wow, the customer success has gotten so much better suddenly. Like, how did this happen?" And it was actually like like officers like facilitating drug shipments and facilitating like dispute resolution. Anyway. Sorry, Nick, to interrupt your flow there. I thought it was interesting.
Such a good point, because the post below the Telegram message there is Shiny Hunters, who was the successor to now the arrested Baphomet, also recently stepped down due to rumors of being a honeypot. This like the aura of law enforcement and debate around the nature of breach forums, whether it is or is not a honeypot, has always been there. This is always a discussion between members, always a discussion on the shout box. There's always doubt cast by members against moderators, and in this case, the doubt was too much for the next administrator, which was Shiny Hunters, who has now passed the torch to another moderator and was a very active user on breach forums. Outside of the drama around ownership, the volume of leaks and posts that are against very high profile targets, specifically by very active users like Intel Broker, is kind of unprecedentedly high. We've always seen waves of forums gaining popularity and then a lot of incidents happening on the forums over the course of time. But in the history of forums, it's typically like a couple of high-profile breaches spread across over several months, whereas or at least weeks. Whereas on breach forums these days, you can't go a few days without a major, a source code leakage, a access being given away or sold, or a major database dump. And again, always take every single post on those sites with a heavy grain of salt. And wait for a response from the body who they're claiming, because in many cases we see that it's either dramatically overstated, or the threat actor thought they had access and didn't, or it was an outright lie, and then in some cases it turns out to be an actual incident. So something to consider when you see all these logos flying across the the dark web news. But that aside, the volume is very high right now. Another interesting event, while Breach Forums has taken the most sort of the most notorious presence in the news, Secret Forums and Black Forums was shut down, which was also an interesting lower volume forum, and is switching to a smaller, more invite-only community and spinning back up in sub-communities, which is a common thing in the eve of a forum being shut down. Is sub-communities will split, like the several times that Breach Forums was knocked offline over the last couple weeks. People came out of the woodwork with proposals for new forums. People spun them up. People shared ideas, and none of them ended up taking hold until Breach Forums was able to come back, and everyone just decided to sort of go back home. That said, we'll always see new forums coming and going, and there's no guarantees that one maintains its stature as the leader, for any amount of time. But let's go to the next slide there, Eric. Yeah. So key trends, like I said, volume is very strong right now. The user bases are active, and the key contributors, there's a lot that come to mind. Intel Broker being one, Sangiero, a handful of others are very, very active at the moment, and hitting a lot of major logos, which has led to an increase in media coverage on these sites, and also led to an increase in scrutiny, which is affecting membership to a degree. This is a thread from just the other day called Thread for All the Fallen Homies, which is a response to a sort of a post-mortem for members and admins to reflect on all of the arrests that have been made in recent history, or all of the people who have disappeared without a trace, which whose disappearance to this day is a mystery to the community. So the arrests, some key users and administrators have been quiet since the first or since the most recent law enforcement seizure of Breach Forums. So it's clear that the heat is definitely turned up for the forums, for the members, and for the administrators. They've taken note of the increased law enforcement activity, and a lot by proxy, a lot of communication that maybe used to happen in the shout box, while a lot still does, has moved off forum to Telegram, which leads to I don't know if we want to I have a little Telegram tangent on the next slide, Eric. I don't know if you want to talk forums before we go into that, but I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah, I think it's worth. I think the juxtaposition you made earlier with Breach Forums, both against kind of some of the Russian language cybercrime forums like Exploit.in, XSS, Ramp is a really good one, right? So you see like Breach Forums, like it's down, it's up, it's down, it's up. I think XSS has been around for what, like 10, 15 years? I mean, it's been like a really long time. Matthew, can I ask you to talk for a moment about kind of like some of the Russian language cybercrime forums? And I think another interesting juxtaposition is like what we see on the Russian language cybercrime forums and how we see kind of that is different from the stuff we see on like Secret Forums or Breach Forums or some of these more like English language focused forums, because there does tend to be a difference in kind of things that we see.
There is, and I mean, there's no clear answer of like why those market haven't been disrupt as the other one, to be fair. XSS rebranded from Damage Lab, so that was kind of they've been around for a while. XSS that Exploit.in as well. To some extent, Ramp has been around for a while too. Those forums we don't like. It seems like my hypothesis, and I mean it's a little bit of a long shot, is kind of the concept of, again, like circle of people, and like as soon as the law enforcement is able to kind of get access to like the one circle, they are able to kind of disrupt it, and they weren't able to do that. But again, like that's pure speculation at this point. There's no clear indicator of why. They know like and even like the Ramp exploit and exploit are accessible to clear web. Like it's not related to any type of technology or like encryption they use or like communication method they use. It's like it's out there, so it's a bit tricky, especially like things like some of them actually have free registration, so it's tough to explain why they're still around. You can say it's depending on the nature of the data. Yes, the volume of data breach and database to be downloaded is a little bit lower, but there is still there are still some that are being shared again as well in those communities. So it's not necessarily purely due to the nature of the information, maybe due to the volume. Like Breach was kind of the main player in anything that is related to accessing like stolen database, credential, and even corporate secret to some extent. But they don't have the exclusivity in that type of content as well. So it starts to explain why this one was targeted. And another hypothesis you can say was the biggest out there, as opposed to the other forums that are less about sharing information and more about discussion. So that's also the other explanation / hypothesis / speculation that I have at the moment of the reason why those forums have been around longer.
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense if you think about kind of like, at least from like a US or Western European perspective, right? If you have major companies having all of their data shared on breach forums repeatedly, I'm sure those corporate attorneys and company CEOs are going to be calling the FBI and Western European law enforcement and saying like, hey, this is a really big issue for us. We want you to take this down. Versus, and there's obviously a lot of complexity involved here versus like exploit or XSS, these where there's not as much like fresh data being shared, and it's more like discussions or selling access to kind of anonymized companies through initial access brokers. And so there's probably a little less kind of attention paid to it just because of like the nature of a post showing up on breach forums, like happened recently where they were claiming to sell access to Zscaler, like one of the major US cybersecurity companies. And also a lot of the companies that show up on breach forums probably also have contracts with law enforcement in various ways. And so there's also probably a concern from law enforcement, like, hey, like these companies showing up could have our data as well, which is obviously quite bad. So yeah, that's pure speculation though.
That is pure speculation, but at the same point, like we see those type of like larger nation, Western countries organization being disclosed and being targeted by the other Russian forums, allegedly Russian forums. But I think the only difference, and I think the main explanation, is really based on the volume and the size and the number of posts targeting those organizations as opposed to the other side. There is some, but at a lower rate.
All right. So now we're going to go off on your Telegram tangent, as you so artfully put it, Nick. Do you want to talk about what this slide's about?
Yeah, I think Telegram, the important point here is kind of what I list in the first bullet, which is Telegram maintains its strength in InfoStealer operations. And with everything we've talked about, from ransomware to forums to the leaks of source code to the compromising of company databases, a very prominent source of credentials is Stealer Logs. And Stealer Logs' relationship with Telegram is right now sort of inseparable at actually every phase of the InfoStealer operation. So from technical backend, the use of InfoStealers the use of Telegram as sort of a C2, or at least a dump for exfilled credentials, as a part of the technical execution of the InfoStealer payload, is a part of the pipeline. Additionally, the sale of the Stealer Logs when they're bundled and packaged up into the Telegram groups, and then also the purchasing of them. So the technical infrastructure, the listing, and the actual exchange all happen on Telegram for a lot of Stealer operations, and a lot of them do end up also freely listed in Telegram channels. In some channels, you pay for exclusive access to Stealers that won't be public. In some channels, you pay for just the quickest access, time to access the Stealer log. So you're paying to have the log when it's published, as opposed to 7 days later in the free channel, where everyone will have access to the logs. It's just there's a time horizon associated with it, which will increase the likelihood that credentials get rotated. But with the success we've seen with Stealers in among ransomware affiliates, and among, as admitted by several threat actors behind high-profile incidents recently, InfoStealers are a major part of the operation. Why execute an incredibly complex, exploitation campaign when you can kind of just walk in through the front door with a good set of credentials or an active session in a cookie, which are all things present in a Stealer log. So Telegram is also, it's not just the place to go for Stealer logs at the moment, but it is also a very popular place for off-forum communication. You'll see, back in the day, all the carding or all the sim swapping groups, and still a lot of sim swapping groups, and groups like Scattered Spider stick to Telegram overwhelmingly for group communications and one-on-one communications for a number of reasons. It's easy to access. It's available as a standalone client on every OS that one would feasibly be using. It is, at least in perception, unmoderated. Getting a Telegram channel banned is like an act of Congress. It's a massive effort, and it almost never happens. Yeah. And there's at least a perception of anonymity among members, which is maintained in the ethos of Telegram as the current place to go for cybercrime communications, and as a technical tool in the actual execution of some of the tools these groups are using.
I think I'm going to just do kind of a quick explainer for our audience, just in case anybody's like unfamiliar with Stealer logs, and go a little bit deeper into it to kind of illustrate next point. And I have a question for Tammy at the end of that on ransomware groups and Stealer logs. So, but to start with, just in case anybody's unfamiliar, basically there's a type of malware. It's called InfoStealer malware. It infects the computer. It steals all of the credentials, all of the session cookies, and a bunch of data about the host. And so this is very different than your kind of traditional leak credentials, is how I would phrase it, where you sign up for a service, that service gets breached, and the email and password you use for that service specifically are kind of out there. Instead, you have all of a single user's passwords, all of their session cookies that have been saved, and a bunch of additional information like form fill data, sometimes credit card information that's been saved. You really can get kind of complete picture of somebody's life from a Stealer log. And we see, again, about 1 million a week. So it's a really pernicious problem. So typically the distribution is through malicious advertising, cracked software, people thinking like, oh, I'm going to go download like Adobe, like a free Adobe license. And then they download it. And it's actually malware that steals all their information. There's no Adobe at the end of it. Unfortunately for those people, at least there would have been kind of a trade there. But in any case, once the malware executes, it sends it back to a C2 server. And then we actually see Telegram being used as this backend, right? Where the logs are in some cases being sent directly to Telegram channels via the Telegram API, and then threat actors are selling access to those Telegram channels to other threat actors. And so it's kind of this role specialization where you have a threat actor who's really good at infecting, and then they sell the actual logs on to other criminals who want to commit bank fraud and steal bank accounts, or steal cryptocurrency wallet data. And sometimes we see crypto wallets and Stealer logs. Or corporate access, where somebody's looking, initial access broker, active on XSS is maybe sifting through fresh logs, looking for kind of corporate applications they can log into. And to that point, or ransomware affiliates might be another group that would be interested in these type of Stealer logs. And to that point, I'm going to ask Tammy, have you seen specific examples in your kind of exploration of ransomware groups where they're specifically leveraging Stealer logs, like very blatantly, to gain access to corporate IT environments?
Right. So the really interesting thing about Stealer logs is when you see, they're being used, because you'll see in the chatter, when you're in the sessions or when you're in the talks groups, that they're saying, oh, initial access to this victim, no Stealer. So they're being used. So a lot of the times you'll see massive initial access brokers package basically top tier credentials. So what they'll say is they'll be in talks, and they'll basically say, okay, so today I have a Spanish from Spain, a company from Spain. Going rate is 500 USD, and here's the Zoom info, and then here's the sample of the credentials, and this was from Redline. And then they'll share screenshots of them inside the environment. They'll be sharing access to, they'll be showing you, okay, so I have domain level access, or I have administrator level access. This is the basically the antivirus or the EDR solution in the environment that you have to defend against. So all of these things are being used by affiliates, and not only affiliates, but sometimes, like I said earlier, the groups will actually source all of these logs for their top tier affiliates. And so this is an actually ongoing trend that we're seeing.
No, thank you, Tammy. I think that was fantastic context. And I will say from personal experience, I think that the kind of rise of Stealer logs as an access vector is one of the things that's behind what Nick was talking about earlier, where you see all of these major companies just getting breached over and over and over again in a way that you didn't see it maybe 2 or 3 years ago, because threat actors have this it's much easier to just, to quote IBM's experts report, which I do all the time, threat actors can just log in. They don't even need to hack in anymore because they have the combination of direct access credentials to corporate applications plus session cookies is just such an effective way to get access compared to, something more technically challenging like developing and zero-day exploits or even exploiting a known vulnerability. So I think this is a really, really huge part, and just the sheer volume of Stealer logs. Like there's, if you have 1 million a week, and we estimate somewhere around like 5 to 10% have corporate credentials, that's 50,000 to 100,000 corporate credentials getting leaked onto Telegram every single week. And so it's more of a buffet than, something particularly difficult. Last but not least, we have markets. What are the major events? So first of all, I'm going to actually take a minute and describe a dark web market versus a forum. Or maybe I'll have Nick describe a dark web market versus a forum and how they're a little bit different.
Happy to. So a market focuses on the sale of goods, whereas a forum is a forum for discussion, a medium for exchanging data or intel, overwhelmingly free, while there's occasionally, the sale of access or initial access broker listings on a lot of forums. The focus is on data, and if there is something being sold, it is data. It's an account. It's a login. It's an SSH. A market, and especially in the context we're talking about here, while those can be considered markets in a sense, or there are market or shop parts of a forum, a market is a place where a good is sold, often directly, occasionally with escrow, but in this case, especially with the topics we're talking about here, think drug markets. These are the successors to some of the larger drug markets that have been taken down. A lot have come in their wake. There's a pretty wide array of drug markets that exist now, often with a regional focus. But that's the core difference. And again, there's a lot of intermingling still on all of these markets almost. You will find not only drug listings, but listings for malware development, listings for, access logs, listings for all manner of technical data for sale. And then sort of things that live in the middle are things like auto shops, which have direct, checkout, where it's easier to access large amounts of some flavor of data. Shops for credit cards, shops for accounts, shops for repackage URLs, logins, and passwords to buy in bulk. But that's the key difference. Markets are places where things are sold, and on a lot of markets, that means physical goods that are shipped through the mail.
I think there's a really interesting point to be made here, at the risk of pushing us a few minutes over time. But one of the kind of key insights that I've gotten as I've spent several years in this field and learned more and more over time is, right, you have kind of the cybercrime ecosystem, which is huge, like hundreds of billions of dollars in transactions. You have drugs, you have guns, you have cybercrime, you have fraud. But when you actually narrow it down, if you really start narrowing it down to corporate cybersecurity, which is obviously the kind of focus and topic of this webinar, it's actually a really small ecosystem. So if you expand out to, bank fraud, crypto fraud, all of these kind of crimes targeting individuals, say, or crimes targeting, refunding would be another example where people are kind of coming up with schemes to cheat major retailers out of money through fraud schemes. It's huge, absolutely massive. Credit card fraud would be another one. But when you actually narrow it down to corporate cybersecurity, the ecosystem is really small. There's a very, at least this is my impression. I'm really curious to get reactions kind of across the board. See, I could already tell Matthew disagrees, so this will be a great conversation. But you're talking about maybe a few major forums. You're talking about a couple of marketplaces, because most marketplaces are drugs or guns or something else. And then you're talking about, even in the ransomware ecosystem, a few thousand actors at most. At least that's, again, my impression. Tammy and Matthew can correct me here, but I'm happy to turn it over to Matthew.
Yeah, I think I don't fully disagree with you. I don't fully agree with you as well. It's kind of that thing where I think, yes, I think you're right. There's what I call a main, a stream of event that happened that is kind of unfortunately business as usual in terms of fraud, like drug reselling, fraud, anything related to fraud. And I think when we look into more corporate security, what we see is more important events that are more punctual, instead of this kind of a regular flow of data. So I think, yes, in volume, you could defend the thesis that there's like a broader ecosystem outside of the hacking and corporate security. But when those events happen, they tend to have a bigger impacts or more global impacts or like more visibility. So I think it's more like you have this kind of a things that happen, unfortunately, as every day, that is kind of a stable. And then you have like those important events that we are usually talking about that are more corporate security events, breaches, all kind of stuff, all kind of security or like event that happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm sorry to like totally like pivot away from the slide we're on. Nick, this is the dangers of doing webinars with me, is I'll like have a random thought and we'll kind of switch topics. Tammy, what do you think? I'd be curious for your thoughts on kind of like the size of it. You're on mute, by the way, but the size of the ransomware ecosystem broadly, and like whether you agree with me that it may be a few thousand individuals if you count access brokers, affiliates, and ransomware groups, or if you think it's kind of much larger or even smaller than that.
I think it's much larger because we're not looking at the lone wolves. We're looking at the groups, and there's going to be so much more. Like, for example, one of the most popular ransomwares out there is Stop. But Stop doesn't actually target large corporations. They target individuals, and with much smaller ransom demands, a couple $100. And they infect hundreds of thousands per year. But they don't have a DLS. They don't follow typical like large scale ransomware groups. So I think the ransomware ecosystem is much larger, and there's definitely a lot of players that aren't necessarily publicly known yet.
No, that absolutely makes sense. I stand happily corrected. Nick, do you want to tell us about some major market events that have happened recently?
Yep, and there are some that didn't make the cut because they're kind of vanilla in the world of markets. Expected activities like the arrests in the Nemesis market, world. But some of the major ones was the arrest of Pharaoh, who was the owner and operator of Incognito Market, which the image you see on the bottom there is the extortion image they posted on the market, which it's not, you'll see people refer to this as an exit scam. It's not really an exit scam in the traditional sense. It's extortion. Pharaoh said, well, as you can see on the bottom there, yes, this is an extortion. Where they're saying we will release transaction records, addresses, anything affiliated with membership to law enforcement. As the owner of the forum, they will release it to law enforcement unless you pay up, unless you forfeit crypto that is involved in your illicit dealings. So that was a big and very interesting incident, because there were also lots of mentions of the administrator being a cybersecurity consultant, which was a couple fascinating revelations in that world. But we'll wait for that case to play out before making any interesting observations about it. Supermarket, which was also major exit, that was a proper exit scam. The owners and operators have been quiet since. And Aries Market retired, and that's Eric. If you want to jump to the next slide, my conclusions about markets is that there have been expected behaviors in the market landscape, which is scams and exits by owner operators, but relatively small volume. And I would say overwhelmingly, markets are quietly continuing to sell drugs or whatever it is they sell, carding hardware and all manner of things. So there are takedowns, there are law enforcement activities targeting them that are successful and cause disruptions. But by and large, markets have been relatively quiet. Or at least the perception of being relatively quiet, because their news has been so dramatically overshadowed by the chaos in the forum world over the last, really 6 months. So that's it for markets. Eric, any questions before we go to audience questions?
No, I think that's a fantastic wrap up. We do have a couple of audience questions. Before we jump into audience questions, I will say very briefly, we do have a product that is very useful for many of the things we talked about in this webinar, from identifying third-party ransomware leakage that may leave your company's files exposed, to identifying stealer logs that could have access to your corporate credentials. We have a free trial on our website. There's no sales call required, so I would encourage you to sign up for it and see if there's kind of useful data that could help prevent a potential breach or compromise of your systems. You can go to flare.io for that. So we have a few questions here. So the first one, I think this is a great question, is what do you think about task forces like Operation Kronos and Operation Endgame? Is it worth the effort, or things will continue the same? I have an opinion on this. I'll air it very briefly, and then I'm going to turn it over to our group of experts here. So, one of the problems with takedowns, right, is a lot of these actors are operating in Russia. A lot of these actors are operating in countries with non-extradition to Western Europe, the United States. And it makes it very, very hard to permanently disable the ecosystem, because you can take down a site, you can hurt an individual's reputation. But like take Lockbit, for example. Even with Lockbit, there's really nothing preventing him from creating a new username unaffiliated with Lockbit, setting up a new ransomware site, and using all of the knowledge and connections he already has to just do the same thing again under a new identity. And as long as there's no law enforcement risk to them, it's very difficult to disrupt an industry where people are making hundreds of millions of dollars using certain expertise. But I'm open to Nick, Matthew, or Tammy commenting and telling me that I'm wrong.
Again, Eric, always happy to be somewhat in a little disagreement with you. I think really it's kind of the concept of like strength and like if there is no law enforcement, if there's no those operation, it's kind of leave as well like a green field for more opportunity and more, unfortunately, cybercrime. I think they do have an impact. We really see like as kind of you can see like with Logbit this morning, you can see with like the all the event that happened in forums, it does impact, it does create some turbulence in the ecosystem in there. And I think at this point, it's worth pursuing the effort. It's unfortunate that there's like, it won't be the final solution, like as you mentioned, because there's no extradition agreement in place, and it's tough to actually like really stop the people behind those group and those and those infrastructure. But it still creates some kind of a pressure on them to make sure that, like, to not necessarily like leave them all the leeway that they will have otherwise. So I think in that sense, it's a good it's a good thing, and I think the results are, in my opinion, more impressive than I would have expected. I honestly, the both operation outcome, I was happily surprised by how far they were able to actually disrupt the ecosystem. So yeah, I think in that regard, I would say, even though it's kind of an endless adventure and operation that you need to run, it still creates some impact in the ecosystem.
Nick or Tammy, do either of you want to comment?
Yeah, so I think in terms of disrupting, like if you look at Operation Kronos, in terms of actually disrupting Lockbit, I think it was extremely successful because just a few months before Operation Kronos, Lockbit was the kingpin, seemed untouchable. So to see them now in a state where they lost most of their affiliates, they lost most of their reputation. You had other users on forums saying like, okay, now that I know your identity, I'm going to come looking for you. To basically having to make a potentially fictitious claim of the Federal Reserve to gain traction and to gain notoriety again. I think it definitely succeeded in its mission of disrupting the ransomware group.
And we have one final. So Nick, I'm gonna have you answer this final question because we are already a little bit over time. And I think it's a great question though. So one last question: all the data leaks and dumps by malicious actors, they want to make money, and as of I know, they sell the data. How public forums, how do they make cash? So basically the question is how do threat actors make cash out of the data dumps that they have, especially I think on breach forums would be kind of the context of the question. Like how does the breach forums economy work?
Yeah, they sell through escrow. So you'll notice in the listings, there's always often an administrator or trusted member of the forum listed as the sort of arbiter for the transaction or the sale. When a sale is made, the thread either disappears or is marked as sold. And if you scroll through the for sale sections of any major forum, you'll see a handful for sale. You'll see a lot of listings that just kind of time out. No one buys them. They sit around for a very long time. If there is someone buying them, it's very quietly. And people on the forums, at least in the forum ecosystem, play pretty fast and loose with sales. You saw a few where someone sold the data in one of the recent Intel Broker examples. There was a successful sale of what they claimed was Zscaler access. The person who purchased it evidently did what they needed, in the words of Intel Broker, and then they listed all of the access information back on the forum. So there's not like, these are not, at least in the higher profile cases, not very clandestine transactions. Whoever is buying this is definitely putting a spotlight on themselves, or at least welcoming a lot of eyes and curiosity into who the purchaser is of some of the major markets. But they make money in crypto. They exchange data. Sometimes the data is the currency, data for access. You'll see in lots of groups, particularly in scattered spider groups, people trading. I'll give you access for a payload for whatever it is you're looking for, or if I can get you access, can I get this? So the economies aren't very rhythmic or predictable in the way they operate, but a lot of these sales happen in the public through an escrow and using popular cryptocurrency services.
All right. Well, that is our webinar for today. I want to thank all of our attendees for sticking with us and for the great questions. We're going to be looking to do more of this type of event in the future, given the popularity and the ease of getting attendees. Certainly makes my life easier when I don't have to push the webinar too hard. But again, thank you, everybody. And thank you to Nick, Matthew, and Tammy for joining us today. I'd encourage you to check out the Flare free trial and have a fantastic day, everybody.